My name is Upton Ethelbah, Jr. My father's people come from the White Mountain Apache Reservation in Arizona. My mother is a Naranjo from Santa Clara, Pueblo. I loved carving stone. Saw the opportunity for retirement, for an early retirement at age 55. I was about 54 at the time. And I said, what am I going to do if I retire? And so I took classes at the art program that they have there at Pewaukee, Pueblo. I took 6 semesters in a row. And I went from knowing nothing, from becoming, from a novice, a complete beginner, to becoming an instructor. And I started winning prizes right away. It surprised me as much as anybody else. At that time I was using some soft alabasters and a little soapstone here and there. Did some limestone pieces, and I zeroed in on dancers immediately as my subject matter, and I was able to maybe translate my feelings, my emotions in taking part and observing these dances and transfer that to stone. All my life I had art around me. There were paintings on the wall by Quincy Tahoma and other artists, the Pueblo artists as well, and Navajo rugs and pottery everywhere. I grew up with art. At our dances, the things that we use for dancing at Santa Clara, we make ourselves. So when they say Indians are good with their hands, I guess it's true. The way I start a project would be to, sometimes the inception, the conception of it is in my mind. I'm driving between here and Santa Clara. I'm driving from here to the Heard Museum show in Phoenix. Sometimes I get an idea. Sometimes that idea comes to me while I'm sleeping. I'm only half asleep. I'm thinking about stone. I'm thinking about images in my mind. I do a lot of studying of our dancers. I still dance at Santa Clara in our corn dance, and I'm a singer with our deer and buffalo dance. When I zero in on a type of a figure that I want to carve, sometimes I will draw on paper. I will do a kind of a rough sketch. And then over time, it may be a day, it may be a week, it may be a year. That sketch continues to evolve until I'm happy with it. And then, depending on the size of the sculpture that I want to make and the material that I'm going to be using, and I'll blow it up. And I blow it up to the size of the stone that I have, or the stone that I will acquire, in order to make that sculpture the size and the material that I want it to be. What took me time is the whole idea of getting the idea really, really solid in my mind. And that's really how every piece takes place. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes me a while. Alright, so this piece is, it's called the Apache Mountain Spirit, and this piece was kind of a milestone piece in that I jumped up in the size of the piece of stone that I carved. I got a piece of Carrara marble from a stone dealer out in California. His name is Dodd Roth. I'm able to tell that stone dealer the size of the piece that I want, the type of stone it is, in this case Carrara marble, and the dimensions, and it'll come to me on a pallet after an exchange of a bunch of money, of course, because these things are expensive. This piece came in at 800 pounds. It was about 30 inches tall by 20 inches by 20 inches. And, excuse me, it was 30 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and 14 inches deep. But it weighed 800 pounds. And it was a monster to move around. I've got a hydraulic lift, but to get it off of the trailer, onto the lift, and over to my working surface, it took about 5 guys to help me to do that. And then I worked on this piece for 6 months. It was a beautiful, beautiful sculpture that I took to my gallery out in Sedona, the Goldenstein Gallery, voted Sedona's best gallery for 3 years in a row now. Linda Goldenstein is wonderful. And Linda was able to find a buyer for that stone piece in 15 minutes. It was sold after arriving in Sedona at the Goldenstein Gallery. Fortunately, we had taken it to the foundry and got a mold on it first. And from the mold then, after several weeks, we saw for the first time the beautiful sculpture that you see here. This is bronze Apache Mountain Spirit. I entered it in the Santa Fe Indian Market in 2006 and was fortunate enough that this piece was selected as the best bronze sculpture in the Santa Fe Indian Market. It was my first blue ribbon. I had gotten many seconds and many thirds and some zeros, but this was a blue. What I have here, and if you can imagine this being carved out of white Carrara marble, it is said that the Ghan dancers, the Ghan people, these are the crown dancers, they come out of the ground or a cave. And so what I was imagining is that this dancer was coming out of the cave. This is the cave here. And at this point, all he's gotten out of the cave is his right arm and his head and his crown. So you don't see any body. You see a little bit of shoulders there, but mainly just the top of his body is out. In doing this, in carving the stone, I maintained 3 different planes. There was the plane of the original stone and those dimensions. And that was the outside, the cave, kept that dimension. The dancer, this Ghan, is turned slightly. When you start turning your sculptures, it gives them more life. But not only was he turned slightly, creating the second plane, but he's tipped back a 3rd plane. And this headdress, you can see it leaning back. These dancers, when you see them, they're very dynamic, and you never just see them standing straight up. They're always moving. Their heads are always pointed different directions. That's what I was trying to capture. He's coming out, but already he's looking up, and he's looking to the side. A lot of times these dancers will have eagle feathers tied on to this bandana that is holding their hood on. And so these are the 4 feathers. 4, of course, we always see 4s, 4 directions, 4 seasons. The armband for the real dancers will have ribbons coming off of the armband here. And diamonds are a very common design on the Apache headdresses in various designs. His right arm is muscular, strong, and he's holding not a sword. Some people think it's some kind of a sword, a weapon. It's not a weapon. It's called a wand. And sometimes it's held like that, sometimes it's held up here, sometimes it's held here, sometimes they're clipped together, sometimes they're put down to balance. And this is the way that I saw that I could make a sculpture with the one arm out, the wand, the head, and the beautiful headdress. In stone, there's an obvious, there's obviously two parts to this sculpture. The base is massive. Now this stone sculpture that I started weighed 800 pounds. When I finished it, it only weighed 300 pounds. I took off 500 pounds of stone from this sculpture, the original Carrara, white Carrara marble sculpture. And I did the very top, the headdress, last because it was very delicate. And I featured a hummingbird. The headdresses for these crown dancers usually have three parts. So I did a part to the right, a part to the left, and in the middle I put a hummingbird. Because a lot of times there's hummingbirds drawn on those headdresses. Hummingbird is that very mystical animal that it represents fertility, but it also represents a liaison between the spiritual world and the world of reality. And we all know how hummingbirds are fascinating, and they're all over the place. They're so cute, and they're so mystical, so spiritual. So in the stone piece, this was very delicate and could have been broken very easily. You can see that it's not very thick. It's very, very thin on top. Whereas this is massive and big. And if you can imagine the whole thing weighing 300 pounds when it's in stone, you get an idea of how massive this is. In bronze, because the bronze is hollow, it only weighs 90 pounds. Still pretty heavy to haul around from show to show. So what I want people to know about me is that I'm a stone carver, first and foremost. I learned to carve stone long before I had any bronzes. It's the stone carving that is me doing what I do. It's the art part of me coming out. What we have here are two pieces, one in stone and one in bronze. This is Texas limestone. It's a piece that I carved probably 6-7 years ago, and then a couple years later took it over to the foundry and they did a mold on it, and from the mold they created the bronze. And so you can see in explaining to people that I do stone sculpture and bronze sculpture, it's important that people know that I carved the stone piece, the stone is molded, and then the stone is returned to me. Once the mold is completed, you don't, the stone's not damaged or anything. The stone can be sold or kept. In this case, I kept this piece. The bronze then, after it's been molded and cast, and there's a lot of steps involved in the bronzing process, from the molding all the way to the patina, the coloring put on it, and the base put on it. Each of those steps is done by an artist in their own right, and that's done at a foundry. When it's completely molded, completely cast, it's in bronze, the people at the foundry will say, okay, Uppy, what color do you want your bronze to be? And that's when I tell them, at Santa Clara, when our girls are dancing, they have a strap over their right shoulder, and they have this nice big scarf that goes over them. And at one point in the day, it's blue. I want this to be this beautiful blue color. What does blue mean? There must be 1,000 different colors and shades of blue. So we have to work together at the foundry in the patina room. and myself trying to tell them what kind of blue we want. If this patina were to be examined closely, you would see that it's not just blue, but there's green and there's little shadows in there, and there's a pattern in there. Probably there was 3 different or 4 different or 5 different layers of patina to finally achieve this. The other thing is you'll see a blending from low to high. This is very blue, this gets more green as it gets to the top. The reason for that was that we're trying to match up the blue and the green that's in the headdress. The headdress itself is very similar to what you actually see at Santa Clara during our corn dances. A lot of the girls have their uncle or their dad make a headdress for them. In many cases, it's a butterfly. I carved the butterfly here in this Texas limestone, and it's a very beautiful sculpture, but it doesn't have the detail that you see here in the bronze of the corn body. In this particular case, we added a step in between in going from stone to bronze. We molded this, but then we cast it in clay. We filled up the mold with clay. When the mold was taken off and the clay was set up, because that clay is melted and it gets, when it cools, it gets solid. Then I had something that looked exactly like these two. It was a dark brown. It looked like a chocolate Easter bunny. If you can imagine that color and that texture, it's that clay. That's where I did some carving on the clay to make the corn in the body, to make the design on the wings of the butterfly, to add a line here. As you can see, there isn't one on the original. Here and here, just to kind of define this, the separation between the scarf here and the dress and the legs. Because I knew that in bronze, when you have different patinas, you need a line to define it. So I carved that in that clay, that intermediate step here, where I had left it plain in the stone original. The other thing I did in the clay was to create the strands of hair, the long black hair. Here it's smooth. I could have carved this and made make it look more like hair, but my style is to suggest something and don't do a lot of detail. So we had the hair plain here. I carved the clay and then we molded the clay, and this then became the final piece. And came out pretty good. I sure like it. This is called Tewa butterfly. Tewa being our pueblos up in the north, Santa Clara. We're a Tewa pueblo, and the butterfly headdress, Tewa butterfly. So when I carve, most of my dancers will have what's called a sun face. The sun face is very common in Pueblo art. So we have the sun face that brings warmth. The sun brings warmth to the earth. The sun face brings warmth into your home. Over here in the stone, you can see how I actually carved a line here, and a line here, and then I drilled it here. That may look easy to do, but it's not, because it's so easy to get off to the side, to go too deep, to cut it down on the edge here, or to break it off on the edges here. The corners will break off. Carving the single hole seems like it might be easy to do. It's not, because as you drill down, there's a tendency for the drill bit to start vibrating. It'll crack, knock off pieces, or if you're not careful, it'll go too deep. There's all kind of things, and that's true with stone carving in general. You've got to be really careful. Then below the sun face is the jewelry that she's wearing, her big earrings and a nice big shell necklace right here. And you can see that the surface here was probably an inch or two out from here, and that I had to carve deep. And that's a nice thing about three-dimensional work, is you're always thinking of depth, depth, depth. How much room will it be between the front of the face and where the headdress is? How much room is left in back when you want to put the back of the head and the hair? You're always thinking three-dimensional. Should it be forward, back, and in stone, it's got to be thick enough where it won't break. So that's about an inch thick. When we got to the bronze, we've carved the clay that was cast, we were able to make this much thinner. This is about maybe 3/4 of an inch. We dropped a 1/4 of an inch easily to make that headdress. More realistic if it's thinner. So that's what you have here, is you've got the stone original and then you have the bronze next to it. Anybody that's done any long distance running knows that it's maybe the only thing in their life that they're completely in control of. You can run fast, you can run slow, you can run 6 miles, you can run 16 miles. It's in your control. You do as much of it as you want and to any degree that you want. Whenever your stone breaks, there's only 3 things you can do. Number one, you keep going with the same subject matter, but you adjust it according to where the break was. Number 2, because the break is so severe, you have to change what you're making into something else, because that's what you have left to work with. Number 3, you pick up the piece and you put it away. You try not to cry. You grab another piece of stone and start a new piece. You don't quit, you don't mope around or be depressed, you just keep after it. But you do have to start something new. I may be old in years, but in terms of my life and my adventure, it's like I'm only halfway there. I've got a lot of ways to go yet, a long ways to go yet. So much to do. And I really appreciate Kyle Carr taking time to hang out with me and talk to me and present my work to the public. So Kyle, I want to thank you a lot for your work.